Welcome to Lesson 4 of the watercolor series on butterfly attracting plants. In this demonstration, I will paint a two-dimensional grouping of African daisies with a multicolored striped background. The idea here will be to practice getting nice even washes on all the stripes. Butterflies find these daisy-like blooms irresistible, and African daisies are just fun to paint. You will get valuable practice on your paint layering and texturing techniques from trying this painting. I have already transferred the sketch onto the watercolor paper. If you need to review how to make this transfer, take a look at Lesson 1 for a thorough description of how that is done. Also, I have already applied and dried some masking fluid in the discs of the blooms to save some white spaces for later accents. Remember, the masking procedure is described at the beginning of Lesson 2. So let's get started on painting the stripes. Okay, what we're going to do first is brush off our painting, our paper. Make sure there's no lint on there. And I do want to make mention of a couple things first before we get started actually painting. I'm using 2 water buckets today because I've got a lot of bright colors and I want to make sure that I have plenty of clean water. Also, one tip I want to mention when you transfer your sketch. I made an adjustment when I did this second painting. On my original one, I transferred the entire painting with the transfer paper, including the stripe lines, and I had a little bit of trouble getting in between these flowers and finding my lines, and I made a few mistakes. So what I did this time was I just transferred the 3 flowers and then I drew in the stripes separately with regular pencil. That way I could make sure that I could see them. And I just also, when I usually do this, just to make sure I'm absolutely straight on my lines, I'll start from the top on each side and mark my paper and then draw the pencil lines. They're not going to show anyway, so they're fine. I didn't mention in the book the dimensions of these stripes. Now you may do any type of a measurement that you would like. I'll go ahead and go over these real quickly just in case you want to use them just like the one that I have in the book. The first section is a large section. That's a 3-inch section, and then I have a 1/2 inch, a 1/4 inch, a 1 inch, another 1/4 inch, 1 1/4 inch, 3/4 inch, another 1/4, a 1/2, and a 1 1/4 inch. Also, you can measure the ones that are in the book, the sketch that's in the book as well. So I just wanted to mention the dimensions that I used on my stripes. Also, another thing, when you're doing all these stripes, I went ahead and mixed up my paint ahead of time to make sure that I didn't have to stop, and I wanted to make sure I could go all the way across one stripe without stopping so I can get a good even wash. On the original painting in the book, I believe I used for my purple, I mixed some of the red and I also mixed some of the blue together to get that purple, but today I'm just going to use a tube purple right here, so I don't have to do any mixing on that. I've already put the masking fluid on. I just made little dots around this second ring here on each one, and so it's already dried and we're ready to go. Try to use the biggest brush that you can. I'm going to wet the paper with water, and it's a little bit of a challenge to get around these areas of all these petals here, so I'm going to take a smaller brush and see if I can get in between these petals quickly with just plain water. That will help me. It will bide me some time and it will help me get the wash on more evenly. You don't have to do that, but I like to. It makes it a little easier. Takes just a little bit of time. Making sure it's good and wet. Depends on how patient you want to be to get all around these little areas here. We'll see. Okay. As long as it stays wet, you're okay. Broad strokes. I'm going to switch quickly over to another brush to get in these little areas here. This is a quinacridone red. Real pretty blue red, bluish red. All the rest of the stripes will go on pretty much the same. Just be careful when you get in among those flower petals. And you may or may not, in a small space, you may not even wet the area first if you don't want to. I'm just making sure I keep these areas wet here until I can get back and go over the whole thing again. Hopefully these aren't drying out too much down here. Because it's wet, it will even itself out some as well. Now I can go back and try to be as accurate as I can here, now that I've got the first areas down. You're going to end up going over the lines a little bit, but that's okay. You can use a smaller brush if you want to. Okay. Let's finish it off. It's drying out a little bit down there. I can get it on there very quickly. See, it will spread itself a little bit now that it's wet. Any corrections you can make later if you want to lift up some that's gone over the line, but I would let it go ahead and dry first. It's starting to buckle a little bit, that's okay. The paper is buckling a little bit. See how it's evening itself out. Okay, I think that's good for the top. We'll let it dry. Remember, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than you put it on, so put on a nice strong dilution. We're going to jump down a couple of stripes down, and the next one we're going to do will be a green one, I think. So we don't want to do anything here right now on the next stripe because then they'll run together. We have to let those dry. Let's go down, do some Hooker's Green. That'll be the third one down. I will go ahead and wet it. You can do a section at a time here. This should go pretty fast. If you wonder if your dilution is strong enough, then you can have a piece of paper handy to test it. Looks pretty good. I like to use the flat brushes because I can get into these little corners easier. I can. It helps me control. I don't think my hand is as sure as maybe some people's might be, so I like to use something that gives me just a little bit more control. Oops, went over the line a little there. We can correct that later. This is a small space. Let me try to do it without wetting it first. I'll do one more stripe after this, and then we'll let this dry. We'll come back when all of the stripes are done and dried. That worked pretty well without wetting it first, so on these smaller ones you can do that. Save some time. If you come back and put more on here, you'll have to go over the entire section again, because if you don't, you might get a bloom in there. So just go over it again if you want it darker. Unless it's still wet. All right, we are going to do a red one now. Another red one. We'll jump down to this one here. I think you have the idea. We'll go ahead, complete all the stripes. Remember, you have two more colors. You've got a purple and you've got the orange. All the thin 1/4 inch stripes are going to be orange. Just make sure they dry enough before you paint one next to it. And it just takes a little time, but we'll come back in a few minutes when all the stripes are done.